Welcome to Risk Management Explained, a monthly podcast series brought to you by Aegis Risk Management that discusses events, methodologies, concepts, and how to handle the unexpected within the construction industry.
Thank you for joining the fourth episode of Risk Management Explained. I'm Ria Patel, and I'll be facilitating today's conversation. On today's episode, we will be discussing the basics on how to prepare an as-planned versus as-built analysis with Senior Risk Manager at Aegis, Ryan Witters. Ryan has worked exclusively in the construction industry and on risk and disputes for over a decade. He specializes in schedule delay, loss of productivity, and cost impacts. Ryan, thank you for joining us today.
Hi, Ria. Happy to be here to talk about some of the fundamentals of the as-planned versus as-built methodology.
Awesome. So why don't you tell us a little bit more about what an as-planned versus as-built method is?
Yeah, so an as-built analysis is really what it sounds like, an as-planned versus as-built analysis. It is a detailed analysis that's based on the reality of actualized events, what actually occurred on site during the project. What you do is you compare what was supposed to happen to what actually happened at the end of the day. And you do this based on the available data. So whatever data you have is really going to dictate the need for this as-planned versus as-built methodology.
Okay, so depending on the availability of contemporaneous project data, the detail and effectiveness of the as-planned versus as-built can vary. Is that correct?
Yeah, the effectiveness can absolutely vary totally. So what you need to have is good daily data if possible, but just regularly updated information that can help you isolate key events for this as-built versus as-planned. This is also just can be used in lieu of having regularly scheduled and properly scheduled CPM updates. A lot of schedules require you to have a P6 or a Microsoft project schedule. This and if those aren't kept up to date on a regular basis, this is a perfect methodology to use in lieu of some other methodologies.
Okay, great explanation, Ryan. I can see why this method is commonly used in the industry, and as we know, there are various methods out there. Can you explain to our listeners when is most appropriate to use the as-planned versus as-built method?
Yeah, absolutely. And as I mentioned already, I mean, this is really going to come down to the availability of good effective data. This data has to include everything that occurred on site, and the more detailed this is, the better your as-built analysis is going to become. For example, the schedules may have some as-built information in them, but the as-built information in the schedules may not always be correct. So what you'll want to do is fall back to the daily reports, which indicate when a certain set of activities start, when they finish. Again, or additionally, a lot of times if you have schedules that don't have fragments built in within them, which is a fragmentary network, you'll want to try to use something else to model this impact.
Okay, so just to clarify, a fragment is just a modeled impact or delay event that's inserted into the schedule, correct?
That's absolutely right. So a fragment's going to show the impact of an issue on a particular schedule. Now, if the schedule again hasn't been updated regularly, hasn't been adequately updated through proper protocol, then what you'll need to do is find a different way to detail or show this impact and its effect on the critical path. And that's where you run into an as-planned versus as-built. So a lot of times contractors will have just this wealth of information. They should already have it just by their own management strategies on the project. So again, as I mentioned, these are daily reports, and this will just detail what was going on during the project.
Okay, so you've mentioned the availability of the data frequently. Why is that so important?
Well, the key here, Ria, is it's very important because we're trying to paint not the best picture, but the most accurate picture possible. This is where you can start to run into some pitfalls a little with this methodology, but yet the whole idea is to promote an accurate picture of what actually occurred on site compared to what was supposed to occur. And if you can do that, you can actually really get a good understanding of the effect of certain issues impacting the critical path.
Okay, so I think that really explains the when. And that brings me to my next question. Once you or the analyst has the necessary data in hand, what are the steps to perform this analysis, and how do we actually work with all that data? And how do you overcome limitations to data documentation availability?
Yeah, great question, Ria. I mean, the first place that you have to start is determining the original plan. So you have to look at the original plan. Usually that's going to already be available to you, but you have to make sure that original plan was realistic. Was it achievable? Because if it wasn't, then there's a whole another route that you might need to go, a different methodology to be used. Now, once you've determined that it's achievable and realistic, you also need to understand if there have been any changes or alterations to that original plan, because that's going to help you understand the as-built as it progresses through time. And then once you've understood and you've determined that the original plan is sound, then you're going to have to illustrate this original plan.
Right. So what are some ways to illustrate this original plan then?
There are a plethora of ways to illustrate this original plan. The main way that you probably see throughout the industry is to use Microsoft Excel, and you can just create a pretty simple bar chart. And I think another software that's out there is Microsoft Visio. I've seen it done used in that before. But those are a couple ways to illustrate it. You just want to show a depicted graphic to help illustrate what this plan was supposed to look like.
Okay, so can you give us some examples of common as-built data sources?
Yeah, so as I've mentioned already, daily reports are a great source for as-built data. Usually these are kept with enough detail that you can understand what happened, when, and for how long, and where, which is going to be key to build in your as-built analysis. So daily reports are going to be great. Progress reports, sometimes architects have their own daily or project visit reports that they can use. So these are some instances where you can pull data from there.
Okay, so what it seems like is that there are many moving parts when performing this methodology, and sometimes that can mean that there's more room for error. So what are the common pitfalls to look out for when performing this analysis?
Yeah, so after you have created your original plan, and now you've also modeled the as-built schedule, and you've compared the two, now you have to actually determine the critical path. And this is where some pitfalls actually can start jumping into the fray. This is a very subjective analysis. And so whenever you're working on this analysis, your as-built critical path could differ from the adverse party's critical path. And that's because it's just a subjective analysis. What you as the expert determined to be the critical path may be different from somebody else's opinion. Another pitfall is that this analysis doesn't necessarily consider all the activity relationships. Yes, it can show sequences, but it doesn't necessarily show the logic between those sequences. When I say logic, I mean the start to starts, the finish to finishes, the start to finish relationships. Those aren't necessarily going to be shown or considered in this analysis. But another common pitfall is that this is a big one. It's hard to improve entitlement with an as planned versus as built. So this is where really a lot of this as built data becomes key to proving that an actual issue impacted the critical path, which in effect delayed the project.
Yeah, that seems like a very important shortcoming of this methodology.
Yeah, it's really impossible to determine with any forensic accuracy without just a great, I guess, as-built data. It's difficult. And Ria, one of the final points I'll make about some of the pitfalls of this analysis is it can be very pricey whenever you're trying to dig into the details. Depending on the level of detail you're trying to get into, you can spend a lot of labor trying to get this to the right place. Now, again, it can be very effective, so that price might be worth it, but it can get away from you if you let it.
Right. They seem like very important pitfalls to look out for. So I'm really glad you pointed those out. But Ryan, this was an excellent review of this important forensic methodology, and I think you provided a lot of clarity on when and how to use it, as well as some strengths and weaknesses of this methodology. I'd like to thank all of our viewers and listeners for tuning in to our monthly podcast, and I also want to thank Ryan Witters for taking the time to talk to us and share his thoughts and expertise on today's topic.
Absolutely. It was my pleasure, Ria. There's nothing more fun than talking about the as-planned versus the as-built methodologies.
Thanks. As always, if you have any questions pertaining to today's discussion or questions related to construction risk management, we can be contacted via LinkedIn or by email at risk@consultaegis.com. Thank you.